Section 1 of Clara A. Swain, M.D. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Larry Wilson. Clara A. Swain, M.D. by Mrs. Robert Hoskins. Clara A. Swain, M.D. The frail little mother of a frail little daughter did not live long enough to see the fullest answer to her prayer that her youngest born might grow up to be a good and useful woman, for she passed away before her daughter began her medical career. But the prayer was not forgotten by Him who ever hears the cry of those who call upon Him in faith. Clara was the youngest of the 10 children of John and Clarissa C.V. Swain. She was born in Elmira, New York, but when she was 2 years old her parents returned to their old home in Castile, and here she spent her early life. Early life. She was not a strong child, and being the youngest of a large family, naturally received much attention, which in after years she concluded was not good for her. She once described herself as a puny little thing who wanted everything she saw and thought she ought to have it. "I had a will of my own," she said, "and my mother found it necessary to be very firm with me at times. Once I was very rude to her when she did not give me what I wanted, and I shall never forget how grieved she was, how lovingly she explained to me the necessity for controlling myself if I would be loved by those around me." She was 6 years old when this naughtiness occurred. "I promised my mother then," she said, "that I would be a good girl, and that I would ask God not to let me be naughty again." She and her sister Hattie, not quite 2 years her elder, loved out of doors a great deal. They were very fond of flowers and animals, and hand in hand they would wander up and down the street to stop and admire the flowers in the neighboring gardens, always mindful of their mother's injunction never to take a flower without permission. Happy indeed were they when they could bring home a handful of wild flowers to their mother. God's flowers, they called them, because they did not grow in anyone's garden. Clara's love for animals led her to pat every dog she met, and more than once she caught a stray cat and took it home to pet it. A story is told that, seeing a lame chicken, she wrapped it in her apron and took it home and bandaged its leg neatly, tending it with such devotion that she soon had the happiness of seeing it able to run about to seek its own food. The cousin who told this story laughingly said, "She probably used splints, but of this I am not sure." Mrs. Swain's sister Elizabeth lived a mile out of the village, while the home of the Swain family was within the boundary line, and as the little red schoolhouse was between them, the children of both families attended this school. Clara was very fond of her Aunt Post, and often went home with her cousins, staying with them days at a time. One of these cousins, now 88 years of age, writes, "When Clara was 7 years of age she was a very pleasant child, always eager to help someone. She lived with us off and on until she was 12 years old, when we moved to Michigan. She was as much at home with us as in her own home, and we were sorry to part with her." Conversion. When Clara was 8 years old, her sister Ann, 6 years her senior, joined the Methodist Church, and this made a great impression on her youthful mind. The consistent life of this sister, and the sweet and simple religious life of her mother, gave her many thoughtful hours, and she asked one day, "Why am I not a Christian? I want to be good too." Just before she was 10 years old, under the influence of a powerful sermon, she felt that she must give herself to the Lord to be His child forever. There were hours of darkness when she felt that she was too great a sinner to be forgiven. But light came at last, and she was happy in the consciousness that she was an accepted child of God. From her father's family she inherited a fund of Irish humor, while her mother, of good old New England blood, inclined to quietness of spirit with earnestness of purpose, and this blending of fun and sobriety caused the young Christian much perturbation of spirit. Conscientious in the extreme, she had many an hour of self-questioning when she feared that in the exuberance of youthful merriment she had cast a shadow on her Christian profession and caused sorrow to the heart of her loving Master. Then it was that the wise and tender mother helped her to see that it was the duty of a Christian, though only a child, to be cheerful and joyous, and that it was possible to please God in her play hours as well as in attendance at church or Sunday school or prayer meeting, just to be the happy child that He meant her to be, and to ask His help in keeping her good and true. Her school books did not satisfy her mind, and one who knew her at the time says she frequently visited the neighbors and borrowed books, some of which she read over and over again. Her love for children led her, when she was about 12 years old, to accept the proposal of the wife of the village merchant that she assist her in the care of her baby, and the money thus earned was used to help her with her studies. In 1848 Clara's sister Anne went to Michigan to teach, making her home with the Aunt Post, who had been so dear to the children of the Swain family. After 2 years of teaching, she was married from her aunt's home to a worthy man who still survives her. Before Anne's marriage, Clara had gone to visit this aunt, and was persuaded to stay, and eventually she took a small school near the farm and taught for a year. "While she was teaching," wrote one of her cousins, "my mother broke her ankle, and Clara cared for her almost a year. She was a grand nurse even at that age, and was a great comfort to us all. She was so bright and cheerful that we were unwilling to have her leave us." Her talent for nursing was called into requisition soon after her return to Castile, when the children of the Presbyterian minister, the Reverend Mr. Hurlburt, became ill with typhoid fever, and she was called to assist in caring for them. It was an anxious time for the nurse as well as the parents, as one child after another fell ill. 2 of the children died, and later the father succumbed to the fatal illness. The faithful nurse remained with the distracted widow and the remaining children, and cared for them tenderly as long as they needed her services. In an old and well-worn Bible is this inscription in her handwriting: "This is the first Bible I ever owned. It was presented to me by Reverend and Mrs. Hurlburt." The summer of 1855 found Miss Swain, then 21 years of age, teaching a few private pupils in the village. One of her scholars of that summer recently spoke of her loving interest in her pupils and her care for their welfare. The following year she went to live with some cousins in Pike, and attended school there. Mr. Swain had a sister living in Canandaigua, who, knowing of Clara's strong desire for self-improvement, invited her to come there for a year of study in the seminary, an invitation which she gladly accepted, and after a year of close study she obtained a position as teacher in the primary department of one of the public schools. Clara was determined to get an education and make use of it if she could, wrote one of her cousins. Teaching in Canandaigua. In the spring of 1859 began an acquaintance with one who was ever after one of Miss Swain's dearest friends. Miss Martha McFarland of Albany accepted the position of teacher in the intermediate department of the school in which Miss Swain was teaching, and they at once became friends. As Miss Swain's aunt was soon to leave Canandaigua, the two friends secured a pleasant boarding place, and for 3 years they walked to school together in the morning and home again in the afternoon. Both were nature lovers, and many a delightful hour they spent on their holidays and Saturday afternoons, and whenever they could find leisure for one of their picnic outings. They were both members of the Methodist Church, and were constant in their attendance at the Sunday services, and at Sunday school as well as at the midweek prayer and class meetings, and were ever ready to help in all forms of church work. Through her years of teaching, Miss Swain showed the same conscientious spirit that was evidenced in her child and school life. "Have I done all I ought? Have I been as helpful to my pupil as I might be?" she often asked herself. For a time she taught a class in Sunday school, and her boys were impressed by her consistent life. Later one of them said, "We noticed that you always went to prayer meeting, so we thought we would go and see what was in it." This class was a joy to her, and her pleasure was great when one and another gave himself to the Lord for service. "Miss Swain was ready in season and out of season," said one of her friends. "One Sunday evening, when a company of us were together having a sing, she turned to a young man near her and bluntly asked, 'Why are you not a Christian?' Taken by surprise, the young man had no answer ready, and they both went on singing. The Reverend Mr. Hibbard was pastor of the Methodist Church in Canandaigua, and Miss Swain and her friend very much enjoyed an occasional visit to the parsonage, where they were always warmly welcomed." Training in the Sanatorium. Notwithstanding her love for children, Miss Swain did not find teaching altogether a delight. The inattention of the children and the daily routine made her feel irritable, she said, but she kept steadily on, hoping in time to carry out a purpose which she had in mind of some day becoming a doctor. When an opportunity offered for her to take a position in the Castile Sanatorium under Dr. Cordelia A. Greene, she gladly gave up teaching and entered upon a course of training which, though sometimes irksome, proved more congenial than her former occupation. All the way along her strong will had availed to overcome obstacles, and here, during many weary hours, she comforted herself with the thought that she was nearing the goal of her ambition. She could not have had a more satisfactory opportunity for the training that she needed. For though Dr. Greene exacted thoroughness in every line of work, she was so sympathetic and so ready to give a word of commendation and encouragement that her pupil could not do otherwise than accede to all the requirements of her position. It was not long before doctor and pupil became fast friends, and the congenial companionship was a lifelong pleasure to both. "I owe much to Dr. Cordelia," she said many times in after life. At the Medical College. After 3 years of study and practice in the Sanatorium, she applied for admission to the Woman's Medical College in Philadelphia, from which she was graduated in the spring of 1869. She often spoke of the pleasure she had in lingering in the park after class hours on her way to her boarding place, and of the occasional free and intimate talks with certain of her instructors. She enjoyed the Sabbath services, and had many opportunities of hearing some of the celebrated preachers of the day. The Reverend Dana Boardman seems to have been a favorite with her, and she took notes of several of his sermons. Bishop Simpson's Christmas sermon, 1868, on Luke 2:13-14, filled my heart with peace and good will to all men, she notes. A sermon by Dr. Willett in November 1868 on What do ye more than others? Matthew 5:47, and one by Dr. McGowan on Mark 10:21, One thing thou lackest, led to much heart-searching. A short time before leaving Philadelphia, she heard Phillips Brooks preach from Malachi 4:2, a wonderful sermon she termed it, and she greatly enjoyed a talk by him on tithing, which she determined to act upon. We have no special record of Dr. Swain's years of study in the Women's Medical College, but we may be sure that she improved every opportunity to perfect herself in her chosen calling. Her instructors were her warm friends, and she corresponded with some of them after she went to India. Dean Bodley, in one of her letters, gave the names of 9 young women in the college who were preparing for medical missionary work, and Dr. Swain made a note of them, saying that she must write to them before their graduation. 2 of these ladies went to India as medical missionaries. Call to service in India. The story of Dr. Swain's call to go to India has been told many times. Mrs. D. W. Thomas, who with her husband had charge of the girls' orphanage of the Methodist Mission, had long felt the need of efficient medical aid for the women and children of India, and had been doing what she could to alleviate the sufferings of those with whom she came in contact. She had even thought that she herself would study medicine when she should go to America for change and rest. In the meantime she was instructing a class of the older girls in the orphanage in physiology and hygiene, both in English and the vernacular. with the hope that some time they might have regular medical training. She talked with native gentlemen and with English officials of the great need for intelligent medical treatment for the women and children of the country, especially for those who live in seclusion, and of her hope that a lady medical missionary might be sent to India. A native gentleman so thoroughly approved of the idea that he offered to defray all the expenses of a medical school or class if a lady physician could be sent from America to take charge of it. Mrs. Thomas's letter of appeal to Mrs. J.T. Gracie, a former missionary, for her assistance in the matter, led Mrs. Gracie to inquire at the Philadelphia Woman's Medical College if a suitable person could be found among the graduates who would accept a call from the Woman's Union Missionary Society of America to go as a medical missionary to India. Miss Clara A. Swain, M.D., was named as one fitted by both professional acquirements and Christian character for such a position. It required much thought and prayer on Dr. Swain's part before she could signify her acceptance of the call, and during the 3 months of delay in giving her answer, the Woman's Foreign Missionary Society of the Methodist Episcopal Church, of which she was a member, was organized. Naturally, she preferred to go under the auspices of her own denomination, and the Union Missionary Society gracefully and generously accepted her decision. Confident that she was obeying the call of God, she set about her preparations for the long journey before her in a cheerful spirit, answering the demurs of her friends with, "It is God's call. I must go." She was greatly cheered when she found that Miss Isabella Thoburn, whose brother, now Bishop Thoburn, had been some years in India, was to be her traveling companion. They sailed from New York November 3, 1869, and arrived in Bareilly January 20, 1870, during the annual conference of the Methodist Mission. Appointment to Bareilly. The two ladies, whose previous slight acquaintance had ripened into warmest friendship during their weeks of journeying together, had hoped that they might be associated together in mission work, but it was not so to be. Miss Thoburn was appointed to educational work in Lucknow, and Dr. Swain found that she was to remain in Bareilly. This appointment gave her the opportunity to begin her medical work at once, for there were not only the girls' orphanage, for which Mrs. Thomas had so long desired efficient medical help, but scores of Christian women who could not go to the city hospital. In addition to these, there was the class of 14 intelligent Christian girls that had for 2 years been receiving excellent preparatory training from Mrs. Thomas, who had fully believed that her prayer for a lady doctor would be answered, and that these girls would yet have the opportunity for the study of medicine. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas were well acquainted with several of the wealthy and influential natives of the city, and Mrs. Thomas welcomed the opportunity to introduce her doctor friend to these homes. There was no lack of patients for the new doctor, for in addition to her work in the orphanage and her medical class, calls to native homes in the city became more and more frequent. At the end of the first 6 weeks after her arrival in Bareilly, Dr. Swain's notebook recorded 108 patients. Her report to the conference, after a year of such service as she had never dreamed of, gave the number of patients prescribed for at the mission house as 1,225, and of visits to patients in their homes 250. The young women of the medical class were gaining practice and experience by caring for the sick in the orphanage and the Christian village, and sometimes accompanying Dr. Swain to visit her city patients, and they were also becoming proficient in compounding and dispensing medicines. This class, begun March 1, 1870, was graduated April 10, 1873, having passed an excellent examination before 2 civil surgeons and an American physician, from whom they received certificates entitling them to practice in all ordinary diseases. Section 2